Welcome to a story that will challenge everything you think you know about forbidden love, power, and betrayal in the antebellum South. Before we dive into this gripping tale, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible historical dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The summer of 1858 hung heavy over Whitmore Plantation like a suffocating blanket. Spanish moss draped the ancient oak trees that lined the grand avenue leading to the main house, their branches swaying lazily in the humid Charleston breeze. The white-columned mansion stood as a monument to Southern prosperity, its wraparound porches offering shade from the relentless Carolina sun. Clara Whitmore adjusted her pale blue silk dress as she descended the mahogany staircase, her delicate fingers trailing along the polished banister. At 19, she possessed the refined beauty expected of a plantation heiress, porcelain skin protected from the sun, golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, and eyes the color of morning sky. Yet beneath her composed exterior burned a restless spirit that no amount of etiquette lessons could tame. "Clara, darling, you're late for breakfast," called her mother, Evangeline Whitmore, from the dining room. The woman's voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Coming, mother," Clara replied, though her steps slowed as she passed the tall windows overlooking the plantation grounds. Beyond the manicured gardens, she could see the fields where dozens of enslaved workers moved through the cotton rows under the watchful eyes of overseers. The sight always stirred something uncomfortable in Clara's chest, a feeling she'd learned to keep buried deep inside. The dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, a testament to the Whitmore family's wealth. Her father, Colonel James Whitmore, sat at the head of the table reading his newspaper, his graying beard neatly trimmed and his military bearing still evident despite his civilian clothes. Her mother presided over the morning meal with the same precision she applied to managing the household staff. "The Beauregard family is hosting a garden party next Saturday," Evangeline announced as Clara took her seat. "A young Thomas Beauregard has recently returned from his studies in Virginia. I believe he would make an excellent match for you, dear." Clara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Mother, I've told you—" "You've told me you're not ready for marriage," her father interrupted without looking up from his paper. "But at 19, Clara, you're already considered quite mature for an unmarried woman. The Beauregards are a respected family with extensive holdings. Thomas would provide you with security and status." "I don't love him," Clara said quietly, the words falling into the room like stones into still water. Her mother's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Love, my dear child, love is a luxury we cannot afford. Marriage is about alliance, stability, and continuing our family's legacy. Love, if it comes at all, develops over time." Clara stared down at her plate, her appetite vanishing. Through the window, she caught sight of a figure moving across the yard, tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of rich coffee. Samuel. Even from this distance, there was something about the way he carried himself that set him apart from the other enslaved workers. While others moved with the resigned shuffle of the oppressed, Samuel walked with quiet dignity, his head held high despite his circumstances. "Clara, are you listening to me?" Her mother's voice cut through her reverie. "Yes, mother. The garden party. I'll attend." But even as she spoke the words, Clara's eyes remained fixed on the window, watching Samuel disappear around the corner of the carriage house. That afternoon, Clara found herself walking through the plantation gardens, ostensibly to cut flowers for the house, but truly seeking an escape from the suffocating atmosphere indoors. The heat was oppressive, and she paused beneath a magnolia tree, fanning herself with her hand. "Miss Clara," she turned to find Samuel standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way his jaw was set with quiet determination. He was perhaps 25, with hands that spoke of hard labor, but a bearing that suggested education, something strictly forbidden for enslaved people in South Carolina. "Yes," she managed, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Your mother asked me to inform you that the seamstress has arrived for your fitting." "Thank you, Samuel." She hesitated, then added, "You speak very well. Where did you learn?" A shadow crossed his features. "My previous master's children had a tutor. I listened from outside the schoolroom window. The admission was dangerous for both of them. Teaching enslaved people to read was illegal, and admitting to such knowledge could result in severe punishment. Yet something in Clara's expression must have encouraged him to continue. "I've read some of the books in your father's library," he said quietly. "When I clean the study, poetry mostly, Shakespeare." Clara felt her breath catch. "Which plays?" "Romeo and Juliet, Othello." His eyes met hers for just a moment before he looked away. Stories of love that crosses boundaries. The weight of his words hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes, Miss Clara, you should." But neither of them moved. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath. The bees silent in their work among the roses, the birds still in the branches above. In that moment, Clara felt the first crack in the foundation of everything she'd been taught about her place in the world. "Samuel," she said softly. "Yes, miss." "Be careful with those books. If father found out." "I know the risks, Miss Clara, but some things are worth the danger." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Clara felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that she hadn't even known was there. The world suddenly seemed full of possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. "Clara?" Her mother's voice rang out across the garden, sharp with irritation. "Where are you, child?" The spell was broken. Samuel stepped back, his expression carefully neutral once more. "Your mother is calling, Miss Clara." Yes, of course." Clara gathered her skirts, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you for the message, Samuel." "My pleasure, Miss Clara." As she hurried toward the house, Clara could feel his eyes following her. The simple exchange had lasted no more than a few minutes, yet she felt as though everything had changed. The carefully ordered world of Whitmore Plantation suddenly seemed fragile, built on foundations that might crumble at the slightest touch. That evening, as Clara sat through another tedious dinner conversation about cotton prices and social obligations, her mind kept returning to the garden, to Samuel's words about love that crosses boundaries, to the way he'd looked at her as though she were more than just the master's daughter, as though she were a person worthy of being truly seen. She excused herself early, claiming a headache, and retreated to her room. From her window, she could see the slave quarters in the distance, small wooden cabins arranged in neat rows. Somewhere among them, Samuel was probably reading by candlelight, risking punishment for the simple act of educating himself. Clara pressed her palm against the cool glass and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would find a way to speak with him again, not as master and slave, but as two people drawn together by something neither fully understood, but both felt powerless to resist. The seeds of rebellion had been planted in the most unlikely soil, the heart of a plantation heiress who had never questioned her privilege until she looked into the eyes of a man who challenged everything she thought she knew about love, power, and the courage to defy the world. The following weeks passed in a haze of secret glances and carefully orchestrated encounters. Clara found excuses to walk through the plantation gardens at specific times, always carrying a book or some household task that would explain her presence. Samuel, for his part, seemed to anticipate these moments, appearing to tend to duties that brought him near wherever she happened to be. Their conversations began cautiously, discussions of literature that gradually deepened into exchanges about dreams, fears, and the weight of their respective circumstances. Clara learned that Samuel had been born on a plantation in Virginia, separated from his family when he was sold to pay his master's debts. He spoke of a sister he might never see again, of parents whose faces grew dimmer in his memory with each passing year. "Sometimes I dream of the North," he confided one afternoon as they stood near the rose garden, maintaining the pretense that he was explaining the proper care of the bushes. "They say a man can be truly free there, can choose his own path." "And what path would you choose?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's hands stilled on the rose stems. "I'd want to teach, to help others learn to read and write. Knowledge is the only thing they can't take away from you, Miss Clara. Even when they own your body, your mind can remain your own." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The injustice of it all, that this intelligent, thoughtful man was considered property, that his dreams were seen as dangerous rather than admirable, struck her with fresh force each time they spoke. "You could teach me," she said impulsively. "Not reading, I already know that, but about life beyond these walls, about seeing the world differently." Samuel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Clara, you don't understand what you're asking. The danger, I understand more than you think," she interrupted. "I understand that I've lived my entire life in a cage made of silk and privilege. I understand that I've never questioned why some people are born free while others are born in chains. And I understand that talking to you has made me see how small and meaningless my world really is." The intensity of her words surprised them both. Samuel glanced around nervously, ensuring they weren't being observed. "Your world isn't meaningless, Miss Clara. You have power, influence. You could use those things to make a difference." "How?" "By marrying Thomas Beauregard and hosting tea parties while pretending not to see the suffering around me. By raising children who will inherit this same system of cruelty. By being different from your parents, by showing kindness where others show cruelty, by remembering that the people who serve in your house are human beings with hearts and souls and dreams." Clara stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of soap and honest sweat on his skin. "Is that what you want from me? Kindness?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither dared to voice. Samuel's jaw tightened, and for a moment Clara saw past his careful composure to the man beneath, a man fighting desires that could cost him his life. "Miss Clara," he said quietly, "what I want doesn't matter. What I want could get us both killed." But Clara had moved beyond caring about consequences. The weeks of stolen conversations had awakened something in her that she couldn't suppress. A hunger for truth, for connection, for a love that transcended the artificial boundaries of race and class. "Then let's not talk about what we want," she whispered. "Let's talk about what we feel." Samuel's resolve cracked. For just a moment, his carefully maintained mask slipped, and Clara saw the raw longing in his eyes, a mirror of her own desperate need. "I feel like I'm drowning," he admitted. "Like every moment I spend near you pulls me deeper underwater, and I don't know if I want to surface." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then don't surface. Stay under with me." The space between them seemed to shrink until Clara could feel the warmth radiating from his body. One touch, she thought, just one touch to know if this feeling was real or merely the product of her sheltered imagination. "Miss Clara! Miss Clara, where are you?" The voice of Mammy Ruth, the head house servant, cut through the moment like a blade. Samuel stepped back so quickly he nearly stumbled, his face a mask of professional neutrality once more. "Here, Mammy Ruth," Clara called, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in her chest. The elderly woman appeared around the corner of the garden path, her dark face creased with concern. "Child, your mama's been looking for you everywhere. That seamstress is waiting, and you know how your mama gets when folks are kept waiting." "Of course, I'm coming right now." Clara smoothed her skirts and avoided looking at Samuel. "Thank you for explaining about the roses, Samuel. I understand much better now." "Yes, Miss Clara. Happy to help." As Clara walked away with Mammy Ruth, she could feel Samuel's eyes on her back. The older woman glanced between them with a knowing look that made Clara's cheeks burn. "Child," Mammy Ruth said quietly when they were out of earshot, "you be careful now. Some paths lead nowhere but heartbreak and trouble." "I don't know what you mean, Mammy Ruth." "Oh, you know exactly what I mean. I've been watching you, and I've been watching him too. That boy's got something about him that draws women like honey draws flies. You ain't the first young lady to notice." Clara's steps faltered. "What do you mean?" Mammy Ruth's expression grew troubled. "I probably shouldn't say nothing, but I care about you too much to watch you walk into a trap. That Samuel, he's got a way with words, got a way of making a woman feel special. But he's been making a lot of women feel special, if you catch my meaning. I don't understand. The Maid's child, Lily, Sarah, even young Becca, they all got that same look in their eyes when they talk about him. That same dreamy, foolish look you got right now." Clara felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You're mistaken. Samuel isn't like that. Honey, I've been alive long enough to know when a man's playing games, and I've seen enough young women get their hearts broken to recognize the signs. You think you're special to him, but you ain't the only one he's been whispering sweet words to." The words hit Clara like physical blows. Everything she'd felt, everything she'd believed about their connection. Was it all a lie? Was she just another conquest for a man who had learned to use charm as a weapon for survival? "I have to go," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Clara, honey." But Clara was already hurrying toward the house, her mind reeling with Mammy Ruth's revelations. The magical world she'd constructed around her feelings for Samuel began to crumble, replaced by a cold, hard reality she wasn't prepared to face. That evening, Clara barely touched her dinner, claiming illness when her parents expressed concern. She retreated to her room early, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she stood at her window, staring out at the slave quarters and wondering how many other women were lying awake, thinking about Samuel's words, his touch, his promises. Had she been a fool? Had her sheltered upbringing made her so naive that she couldn't recognize manipulation when it was happening to her? The thought made her stomach churn with humiliation and something darker, a growing anger that burned away the romantic fantasies she'd been nurturing. Tomorrow, she decided, she would confront Samuel. She would demand the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Because if Mammy Ruth was right, if Samuel had been playing her for a fool, then Clara Whitmore was about to learn a lesson about power, deception, and the dangerous game of hearts that no finishing school had ever prepared her for. The girl who had fallen asleep dreaming of forbidden love would wake up a woman determined to uncover the truth, regardless of the cost. Clara barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's face. The way he'd looked at her with such apparent sincerity, the careful way he'd spoken about dreams and freedom. Had it all been an elaborate performance? The thought made her feel sick with humiliation and rage. By dawn, she had made her decision. She would find Samuel and demand answers. But first, she needed to know more about what Mammy Ruth had implied. If Samuel had indeed been carrying on with the house servants, there would be signs, whispered conversations, meaningful glances, the kind of subtle communications that develop between people sharing secrets. Clara dressed carefully in a simple day dress and made her way downstairs earlier than usual. The house was just beginning to stir with the quiet efficiency of the morning routine. She found Lily in the kitchen, a young woman of perhaps 20 with smooth, dark skin and intelligent eyes. Lily was arranging flowers in a vase, her movements graceful and precise. "Good morning, Lily," Clara said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Morning, Miss Clara. You're up early today." "I couldn't sleep. The heat, you know." Clara moved closer, pretending to examine the flower arrangement. "These are lovely. Did Samuel bring them from the garden?" The change in Lily's expression was subtle but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of her shoulders, a momentary pause in her work. "Yes, miss. He brought them yesterday evening. He seems to have quite a way with flowers. And with other things, I imagine?" Lily's hands stilled completely. She glanced around nervously before meeting Clara's eyes. "Miss Clara, I don't know what you're getting at, but—" "I think you do know, Lily. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other across a gulf of race and class that had never seemed more pronounced. Then Lily's composure cracked. "Miss Clara, please don't make trouble for him. Or for us. We ain't done nothing wrong." "Us?" Clara's heart sank even as her suspicions were confirmed. "How many of you are there?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Clara, you don't understand. It ain't what you think. Samuel, he helps us. When we're scared, when the overseer gets too rough, when we need someone to talk to, he makes us feel like we matter, like we're more than just property." "And how exactly does he make you feel that way?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of moisture across her dark skin. "He talks to us, really talks to us, like we got thoughts and feelings that matter. He tells us we're beautiful, that we deserve better than this life. And sometimes—" She trailed off, unable to meet Clara's gaze. "Sometimes what, Lily?" "Sometimes he holds us when we cry. Sometimes he kisses away our tears. Sometimes he makes us forget, just for a little while, that we ain't free." Clara felt as though she'd been slapped. The romantic fantasy she'd constructed around Samuel's attention crumbled completely, replaced by a harsh understanding of the reality. Samuel wasn't the noble, educated man she'd imagined. He was a manipulator who used the desperation and vulnerability of enslaved women for his own purposes. "How many?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Clara." "How many, Lily?" "Most of us. Miss at one time or another. Sarah, Becca, Molly, even old Ruth, before she got too wise to his ways." Lily's voice broke. "We all thought we were special to him. We all thought maybe he really cared." Clara turned away, unable to bear the pain in Lily's eyes, pain that mirrored her own growing anguish. She had been such a fool, such a naive, sheltered fool. Does he force himself on you?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. "No, miss, he ain't like that. He's gentle, sweet even. That's what makes it so hard to resist. When you spend your days being treated like an animal, and then someone comes along who treats you like a woman." Lily shook her head. "We know it don't mean nothing to him. We know he's just using us to feel powerful, to feel like a man when everything else in his life makes him feel like nothing. But sometimes a lie that makes you feel good is better than a truth that breaks your heart." The wisdom in Lily's words cut Clara to the bone. She realized that she and these women had all been victims of the same cruel game. Samuel's need to exert power in a world where he had none. The only difference was that Clara's privileged position had made her believe she was different, special, chosen. "I'm sorry, Lily," Clara said quietly. "I'm sorry he hurt you. I'm sorry I was blind to it." You ain't got nothing to be sorry for, Miss Clara. You was just another one of his victims. The only difference is you got the power to do something about it." Clara looked up sharply. "What do you mean? You could have him sold, sent away. Your daddy would do it if you asked, especially if you told him Samuel was bothering you." The suggestion made Clara's stomach turn. Despite her anger and hurt, the thought of condemning Samuel to an uncertain fate on another plantation, or worse, filled her with revulsion. "I won't do that, Lily. Whatever Samuel has done, he doesn't deserve to be sold like cattle." "Then what will you do?" Clara straightened her shoulders, feeling something hard and cold settle in her chest where her romantic dreams had once lived. "I'm going to confront him. I'm going to make sure he knows that his games are over, at least as far as I'm concerned." She found Samuel later that morning in the carriage house, polishing the brass fittings on her father's buggy. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment his face lit up with the same warm smile that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her angry. "Miss Clara, this is a pleasant surprise." "Is it?" Clara stepped into the dim interior of the carriage house, ensuring they were alone. "I wonder if you'll still think so when you hear what I have to say." Something in her tone must have warned him. His smile faded, replaced by a wary expression. "Miss Clara, if I've done something to offend—" "Oh, you've done something, Samuel. You've done quite a lot, actually." Clara moved closer, her eyes never leaving his face. "Tell me, when you were whispering sweet words to me about Shakespeare and freedom, were you thinking about Lily, or Sarah, or perhaps young Becca?" The colour drained from Samuel's face. For a moment, he looked like a man who'd been caught in a trap of his own making. "Miss Clara, I can explain." "Explain what? How you've been using every woman on this plantation to feed your own ego. How you've been playing us all for fools." Samuel's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the situation these women are in, the loneliness, the desperation." "So you decided to take advantage of it?" Clara's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "You decided to use their pain for your own pleasure." "It wasn't like that!" Samuel's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be powerless? To have every aspect of your life controlled by others? Those women, they needed comfort, and I needed to feel like I mattered to someone. It wasn't about taking advantage. It was about survival." "Survival?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it when you seduce vulnerable women with pretty words and false promises?" "And what about you, Miss Clara?" Samuel's voice turned hard, dangerous. "What did you think was going to happen between us? Did you think your daddy was going to let you marry a slave? Did you think we were going to run away together and live happily ever after in some fairy tale?" The words hit their mark. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized how naive her fantasies had been. "At least I was honest about my feelings," she shot back. "I didn't pretend to care while secretly laughing at how easily I could manipulate someone." "You think I was laughing?" Samuel stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "You think any of this was easy for me? You have no idea what it's like to want something you can never have, to care for someone who could destroy you with a single word," to her father. "Then why did you do it? Why did you pursue me if you knew it was impossible?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with suppressed emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because for a few stolen moments you made me feel like a man instead of property. Because when you looked at me, I saw myself reflected as someone worthy of love instead of just use. Because I'm human, Miss Clara, and humans make foolish choices when they're desperate for connection." The raw honesty in his words caught Clara off guard. She had expected defiance, manipulation, perhaps even anger. She hadn't expected this vulnerable admission of his own pain and loneliness. But that doesn't excuse what you did to those women, she said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. No, it doesn't, Samuel agreed. I used their loneliness to ease my own, and that was wrong. But don't pretend you're any different, Miss Clara. You used me, too, to feel rebellious, to feel special, to convince yourself you were different from your parents. We all used each other because that's what people do when they're trapped in impossible situations. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The truth of his words was undeniable, and it made her feel small and ashamed. She had used Samuel as an escape from her privileged boredom, as a way to feel morally superior to her family, as a romantic fantasy that made her feel special and chosen. So what now? She asked quietly. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something like sadness in his eyes. Now you go back to your world, and I go back to mine. You marry your Thomas Beauregard and forget this ever happened. And I try to be a better man than I've been. And the other women? I'll leave them alone. You have my word on that. Clara nodded, feeling hollow and exhausted. The passionate anger that had sustained her through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind only a deep sadness for all of them, for Samuel, trapped in a system that dehumanized him, for the women he'd used and who had used him in return, and for herself, forced to confront the ugly realities that her privilege had allowed her to ignore. "Goodbye, Samuel." "Goodbye," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Miss Clara." As she walked away from the carriage house, Clara felt as though she were leaving behind more than just a failed romance. She was leaving behind her innocence, her naive belief that love could conquer all, and her comfortable illusions about the world she lived in. The girl who had dreamed of forbidden love was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood, perhaps for the first time, the complex web of power, desperation, and survival that governed all their lives. It was a bitter education, but one that would serve her well in the difficult choices that lay ahead. 3 months had passed since Clara's confrontation with Samuel, and the autumn of 1858 had settled over Whitmore Plantation like a heavy blanket. The cotton had been harvested, the leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the social season was in full swing. Clara had attended the Beauregard garden party, had danced with Thomas, and had accepted his proposal of marriage with all the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to their own execution. The engagement had been announced in the Charleston papers, and wedding preparations were underway. Clara went through the motions with mechanical precision, selecting fabrics, approving menu choices, smiling at the endless stream of congratulations from family friends. But inside, she felt as though she were sleepwalking through someone else's life. Samuel had kept his word. Clara occasionally saw him working around the plantation, but he maintained a careful distance from both her and the house servants. The easy charm that had once made him so magnetic seemed dimmed, replaced by a quiet professionalism that spoke of hard-won wisdom. The women he had once pursued seemed to have found their own peace as well. Lily had begun walking out with a young man from a neighboring plantation, and Sarah had thrown herself into her work with renewed focus. Even young Becca seemed lighter, more carefree, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Clara should have felt satisfied that her intervention had brought positive changes. Instead, she felt empty, disconnected from her own life in a way that frightened her. The wedding dress fittings had become a particular torment. Standing still while seamstresses pinned and adjusted the elaborate white silk gown that would mark her transformation from Clara Whitmore into Mrs. Thomas Beauregard. Each fitting felt like another step toward a future that belonged to someone else entirely. Her mother had noticed her listlessness, attributing it to pre-wedding nerves and the natural melancholy that sometimes accompanied such momentous life changes. "It's perfectly normal, darling," Evangeline had assured her during one particularly difficult afternoon. Every bride feels overwhelmed by the magnitude of marriage. Once you're settled in your new home with Thomas, you'll find your happiness again. But Clara knew her malaise ran deeper than wedding jitters. She had glimpsed something beyond the confines of her privileged world, had tasted the possibility of connection that transcended social boundaries, and now she felt trapped in a life that seemed increasingly meaningless. The charitable work her mother encouraged, the social calls and tea parties that filled her days, the endless discussions of household management and proper deportment, all of it felt like elaborate theatre designed to distract her from the fundamental emptiness at the core of her existence. It was on a crisp October morning that everything changed again. Clara was in the morning room, reviewing seating arrangements for the wedding breakfast, when Mammy Ruth appeared in the doorway. The older woman's face was grave, and she twisted her apron in her hands, a sure sign of distress. "Miss Clara, I need to speak with you, privately." Clara set down her papers and followed Mammy Ruth to a small alcove near the back stairs, away from the main flow of household traffic. "What is it?" "Mammy Ruth, you look troubled." "I am troubled, child. Troubled about something I should have told you months ago, but I was hoping it would sort itself out." Mammy Ruth glanced around nervously before continuing. "It's about Samuel." Clara's heart clenched. "What about Samuel?" "You remember when I warned you about him, about how he'd been carrying on with the house girls?" "Yes, I remember. And I confronted him about it. He's left them alone since then." "That's just it, child. I don't think he ever was carrying on with them, not the way I made it sound." Clara stared at the older woman, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet once again. "What do you mean?" Mammy Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I mean I lied to you, Miss Clara. I saw how you were looking at that boy, saw how he was looking at you, and I got scared. Scared of what might happen if things went too far. So I told you stories, made it sound like he was some kind of smooth-talking seducer who was playing with all the girls. But Lily confirmed it. She told me about the others, about how Samuel had been with them. Lily told you what she thought you wanted to hear, child. That girl's been in love with Samuel for 2 years, but he never so much as looked at her sideways. When you came asking questions, she saw a chance to maybe get him in trouble, to hurt him the way she felt hurt by his indifference." Clara felt as though she couldn't breathe. "Are you saying none of it was true?" "Oh, some of it was true. Samuel did talk to the girls, did offer comfort when they were hurting. But it wasn't what I made it sound like. He never took advantage, never made promises he couldn't keep. He was just kind. And in a place like this, kindness from a man can feel like love to a lonely woman." "Then why did you lie to me?" Mammy Ruth's face crumpled. "Because I've seen what happens when white women and black men get too close, child. I've seen good people die for nothing more than a look or a word. I thought if I could make you see Samuel as just another smooth-talking man, you'd lose interest and move on. I thought I was protecting you both." Clara sank onto a nearby chair, her mind reeling. Everything she had believed about Samuel, everything that had driven her to confront him and end their relationship, had been based on lies. She had accused him of manipulation and cruelty, had made him confess to sins he had never committed. "Does he know?" she whispered. "Does Samuel know that you lied?" "I don't think so. When you confronted him, he probably figured the truth had come out somehow. He's a proud man, Miss Clara. He wouldn't have defended himself by throwing the blame on others. So he let me believe the worst of him rather than expose your lies or Lily's jealousy. That's the kind of man he is, child. The kind who takes responsibility even for things that ain't his fault." Clara felt sick with guilt and regret. She had been so quick to believe the worst, so ready to see Samuel as a villain rather than question the stories she'd been told. Her privileged position had made her arrogant, convinced that she was the injured party, rather than considering that she might be the one causing harm. "I have to talk to him," she said, starting to rise. Mammy Ruth caught her arm. "Miss Clara, think about what you're doing. You're engaged to be married. Your wedding is in 6 weeks. Even if you could make things right with Samuel, what then? You can't change the world you live in. Maybe I can't change the world, but I can change myself. I can stop being the kind of person who believes lies about someone I claim to care about." "And what about your family, your reputation, your future?" Clara looked at the older woman, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. Mammy Ruth had lied, but she had lied out of love and fear, trying to protect Clara from a world that would destroy her for following her heart. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I don't know what I'm going to do about any of that, but I know I can't marry Thomas Beauregard while carrying this guilt. I know I can't build a life on the foundation of lies and cowardice." She found Samuel that afternoon in the same place where their relationship had begun, the rose garden where he had first spoken to her about Shakespeare and love that crosses boundaries. He was pruning the bushes, preparing them for winter, his movements careful and precise. Samuel. He looked up and Clara saw the wariness in his eyes. The easy warmth that had once characterized their interactions was gone, replaced by the careful neutrality of a man who had learned not to trust. "Miss Clara, how can I help you? I need to apologize to you. I need to tell you that I know the truth about what happened between us." Samuel's hands stilled on the rose stems. "Miss Clara, I don't think... Please, let me say this." Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "Mammy Ruth told me the truth, about the lies she told, about Lily's jealousy, about how I was wrong to accuse you of the things I accused you of." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the roses. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "It doesn't matter now, Miss Clara. What's done is done. It matters to me. It matters that I was so quick to believe the worst of you, that I let my own insecurities and prejudices cloud my judgment. It matters that you let me think you were guilty rather than defend yourself. What would have been the point of defending myself? Would it have changed anything between us? Would it have made our situation any less impossible?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Maybe not. But it would have meant that we ended things with honesty instead of lies. It would have meant that I didn't spend the last 3 months hating you for things you never did. Samuel finally looked at her, and Clara saw pain in his eyes that matched her own. "I never wanted you to hate me, Miss Clara. But maybe it was easier for both of us if you did. Easier, maybe, but not right." Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. "Samuel, I want you to know that what I felt for you was real. Whatever mistakes I made, whatever lies I believed, my feelings were genuine. You weren't just a rebellion or a fantasy to me. You are. Someone I could have loved completely if the world were different." Samuel's composure finally cracked. Clara saw his hands tremble as he set down the pruning shears, saw the way his jaw tightened as he fought for control. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips without the formal "Miss" felt like a gift. What we felt was real. What we shared was real. But the world isn't different, and we can't change that by wishing it were so. I know that nothing can come of this, that we can't be together, that I'm going to marry Thomas Beauregard and live the life that's expected of me. But I needed you to know that you weren't wrong about what was between us. I needed you to know that someone saw you as more than just property, more than just a slave. I needed you to know that you mattered." Samuel stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the unshed tears in his eyes. "You mattered too, Clara. You still matter. You always will." For a moment, they stood in the garden where their story had begun, surrounded by roses that would bloom again in spring, while they remained forever apart. Clara felt the weight of all the words they couldn't say, all the futures they couldn't share, all the love they couldn't express. The afternoon light filtered through the bare branches above them, casting shifting shadows across their faces. Clara memorized every detail of this moment, the way Samuel's dark eyes reflected the golden autumn sun, the careful way he held his hands at his sides, as though afraid that any movement might shatter the fragile peace between them. The sound of distant voices from the plantation workers returning from the fields. She knew this would be their last real conversation, their final moment of honest connection before the world reclaimed them both. "I should go," she whispered. "Yes, you should." But neither of them moved. Instead, Samuel reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Clara's hand with his fingertips. It was the first and last time they would ever touch, and Clara felt the contact like an electric shock that traveled straight to her heart. "Be happy, Clara," Samuel said quietly. "Find a way to be happy, even if it's not the happiness we dreamed of. You too, Samuel. Promise me you'll find a way to be free, even if it's not the freedom we imagined." He nodded and then stepped back, breaking the contact between them. Clara turned and walked away, her back straight and her head held high, even as tears streamed down her cheeks. 6 weeks later, Clara Whitmore became Mrs. Thomas Beauregard in a ceremony that was the talk of Charleston society. She wore her grandmother's pearls and her mother's wedding dress, and she smiled at all the right moments. Thomas was kind and attentive, and Clara knew she could build a decent life with him. But sometimes, when she walked through her new garden or read poetry by candlelight, she thought of a man who had taught her about love that crosses boundaries, about the courage to see beyond the surface of things, and about the price of truth in a world built on lies. Samuel remained at Whitmore Plantation for 2 more years before he was sold to a family in Virginia, not as punishment, but because Colonel Whitmore was expanding his holdings and needed the money. Clara heard about his departure through letters from her mother, and she hoped that wherever he went, he found the freedom and dignity he deserved. The war came in 1861, bringing with it changes that no one could have imagined. The world that had seemed so permanent, so unchangeable, crumbled in the space of 4 years. When it was over, Clara found herself a widow with 2 young children, struggling to rebuild her life in a South that bore little resemblance to the one she had known. She never saw Samuel again, but she carried the lessons he had taught her into her new life. She treated her servants with respect and dignity, she questioned the assumptions she had been raised with, and she tried to raise her children to see beyond the color of a person's skin to the content of their character. It wasn't the love story she had dreamed of as a young woman, but it was perhaps something more valuable. A story of growth, of learning to see truth even when it was painful, and of finding the courage to live with integrity even when the world around you was built on lies. In the end, Clara realized that Samuel had given her the greatest gift possible, not his love, though that had been precious, but his example of how to remain human in an inhumane world, how to find dignity in impossible circumstances, and how to choose truth over comfortable illusions, no matter the cost. And there you have it, a story of forbidden love, bitter betrayal, and the painful journey toward truth and redemption. Clara's journey from naive privilege to hard-won wisdom reminds us that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about getting what we want, but about learning who we truly are. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling historical dramas that explore the complex depths of the human heart. What did you think of Clara's transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments below.